to speak to all. I've kind of amended my presentation as I've been listening to everybody, because there were so many really interesting points made that I don't want to come across as just repeating people or being just a lawyer. I am a lawyer for my sins, but I'm also a massive tech enthusiast, and we've probably already realized now, a bit of a sci-fi nerd. I became a lawyer almost by mistake, to be perfectly honest. I didn't really know what to do. I was always massively into technology, but I qualified as a lawyer during the dot-com crash, when law firms, certainly the one I worked at the time, I won't say who it was, said, oh, there's no way there'll be such a thing as a technology lawyer in the future. So I had no idea. I guess they're eating their words now when I'm doing what I do today, which is some things pretty boring stuff, outsourcing contracts, licenses, what have you, but some is very much at the forefront of technology. And that includes drafting rules for adoption of AI, getting into contracts in terms of who is liable when an AI goes wrong, everything from driverless cars down to some fairly mundane pieces of software that actually embrace AI in quite a big way. Anyway, we've all seen, just showing that we're all nerds, we've all seen all of the evil AIs from cinema history. So you've obviously got HAL, you've got the HAL 9000, I believe, and then the T-800 from Terminator, which were both AI set up to do a particular job, and it all went terribly wrong. Skynet was an AI controlling the Terminators, which was essentially looking after weapon systems, decided it would just get rid of everybody on the planet and take over and kill everyone. But I've also added in here Amazon, who we haven't mentioned yet, who have an incredibly powerful AI in the form of Amazon Alexa, which I have a device next to me, currently muted, so hopefully it's not listening to me thinking, oh, he's on to me, I need to finish him off quickly before he actually brings me down. But he's collecting vast amounts of data and learning all the time in terms of learning people's voices, learning people's habits. And of course, Alexa is connected to a bigger network. You may be familiar with the Ring doorbell scandal that is going on at the moment, where essentially Amazon's getting access to photos of what's going on in their security devices and creating its own Wi-Fi network to extend essentially the reach of those devices as well. So there's a lot of AI issues. And my problem, as I said at the beginning, was that I would like to think that everyone is fundamentally a good person, and when people are developing AI in their image or otherwise, they have goals and they don't expect anything bad to happen. However, I've been a lawyer long enough to know that companies and shareholders will often make decisions that may not be in the interests of the rest of the world, but in the interest of what is best for them and their shareholders. And I can give a few examples of where AI has been used in a way that is not acceptable in the mainstream before I go on to what's going on at the more sort of corporate level. So I don't know if anyone saw a TV show where they used Anthony Bourdain's voice. They faked his voice using AI. Now, he is a very famous chef who sadly hung himself. He committed suicide. And they used his voice, recreated it, essentially talking about despair and how miserable things were, which was never something that he'd spoken about. It became as a bit of a surprise when he did commit suicide, he died. But it was like, how can you get someone from beyond the grave and essentially recreate them in a way that they have had no consent in this, and maybe you can get their family's consent. In some cases, that's what's been done. I'll give some examples. But you're essentially using AI in a way that's manipulating people, whether you like it or not, into someone who's very depressed, killed themselves. From the grave, they then speak about how depressed they were. I mean, maybe I'm being too sensitive, but that sits a bit ill with me. I mean, I would have thought most people think, hang on, this is a strange way to be using technology, but one that's not been used before. It's been around for a long time. Is everyone familiar with deepfakes? Hands up, you must be. You can essentially transplant someone's face using AI technology onto you or any other person for that matter, make them say or do whatever you want. You can make it work with voices too. If you're a fan of South Park, the creators of South Park did essentially an online spoof news consumer investigations program that uses Donald Trump as the consumer investigator, where he investigates deep fakes and says, oh, these are terrible, you can just make fun of people, and I would recommend checking it out. But it is a way essentially to use AI to make someone appear as if they are someone they are not. Good examples. I mean, people think, oh, it's a very niche technology. It isn't actually that hard to produce a deep fake anymore. And indeed, if anyone's still on Facebook, despite all of the complaints we've saying about it, you'll have seen there are tools seemingly run by some company somewhere in Russia, where you can upload your face and add it onto something else. And you see lots of examples of it. People are probably giving away personal data, and that's another issue, but it is incredibly easy to do. You've got the other issue in terms of artificial intelligence actors. Did anyone see, I think it might have been, actually no, either Rogue One, I think it might have been Rogue One was the film I'm thinking about, where they used Princess Leia, and there's another Star Wars film where they used Peter Cushing and just recreated them as if they were young. Or even if you've seen the recent finale to The Mandalorian, which again is making people appear whether they are there when in fact they are not, or they're not that age. They're either dead or they're older or whatever. And again, this is fine if you've got consent to it. But again, you think how this can be used to mislead people, to manipulate people. You can create using artificial technology, artificial intelligence, which again is a very advanced technology and knows how to manipulate these things quickly, faster than any digital artist could do, to make things appear there when they're not. So the power of AI is actually quite scary. We're maybe not at the Skynet stage yet, we're not at the HAL stage yet, but we are advancing more quickly than ever before. Now, I'm in Hong Kong, China is across the border. There are lots of debates, and I think we'll see a bit of a war in much the same way we've seen a technology war between the East and the West. We will see a war in terms of use of AI, and indeed in surveillance, when it comes to essentially how people are monitored and how data is collected. Now, one of the things that was raised earlier was governments scoring their citizens on a credit score. That's already happening over in China. There is a social credit system where if you do the right thing, you do the wrong thing, your score can go up and down. And people over there actually show off their scores. It's seen as a great thing to put on your dating profile if you've got a high social credit score. But a lot of it's being done without any human input. It's being done entirely by AI. Similarly, if any of you have been to China recently, then not that anyone's really traveled anywhere for a while, the amount of facial recognition going on is insane. As soon as you get off a plane, you go to the airport, scan is taken of your face. I have been to a hotel, they've got access to the same scan to make sure that it's me checking into the hotel. I haven't really consented to any of that, yet it exists. Now, Europe, and certainly is thinking, well, hang on, this is a bit scary. If we're allowing AI to judge what people look like, use that to follow them around, but then also identify people not just by their faces, but perhaps even on ways that they're walking, their facial expressions. So there's software being used, for example, to monitor people's faces in a classroom to see if they're paying attention, to see whether they're happy or they're enjoying something. You suddenly think, is this going a bit far? And EU is certainly making strides to stop this in terms of its draft regulation, but is the genie just out the bottle? Has it gone too far? If I'm talking big picture, people say, well, AI, that's all very exciting. That's happening in other jurisdictions, or it's something that doesn't really affect me because I don't see it happening in practice. But actually, every single one of us is affected by AI all of the time. Anyone who is operating online, everyone who is buying anything online, anyone who's using social media, you are being manipulated by AI. Data is being collected about you. It's spitting out things that it thinks that you want to see or to consume. But it's going on not just in a sort of social media advertising level, but it's happening in other areas of our lives. Now, in the UK, there used to be a TV show called Little Britain, which probably is not socially acceptable anymore. But it had an ongoing sketch where someone would go into a bank and there was a lady who really wasn't engaged in her job at all. And someone would ask for something like a mortgage or a loan. And she'd sit there and say, hang on, she'd type away. She's like, right, you want this? Computer says no. And that was it. That was the answer. You couldn't go any further. I'll show you a picture of her here. Well, it's actually a guy in drag, but there we go. And everyone laughed at that and thought, this is hilarious. However, if you apply, you'll have seen, if you're banking with any of the major banks, certainly in the Western world, probably in the Eastern world as well, you'll have seen apply for a loan, get a response within 5 minutes or 5 seconds in some cases. It's all being done with AI. It's looking at what your behavior is in terms of your finances, your credit score, and deciding using AI and machine learning to decide whether you are entitled to a loan. The same will be true in terms of when you're hiring a car. It will look at the systems, it will look at where you're from, it will look at your record, it will get information in terms of your license, and it will make an assessment as to whether you should be able to hire that car. This is happening now in every every part of our lives. It's happening in some universities in terms of how they're scoring people when they apply for jobs. I know that law firms are even undertaking the same thing in hiring trainee solicitors, because people say, Paul, why are you doing it the old-fashioned way of the interviews and getting them to do papers and essays when you could just be getting them all to do the same test and then scoring them based on their record using the computer? It's everywhere. And that's, for me, is like, wow, that's really cool. And then the lawyer in me thinks, but hang on, none of this is regulated. If you'd asked me to come on and say, oh, please tell us what the law is in relation to AI, I'd be like, 2 minutes, thank you very much, I'm off. There isn't really much there. But it is a big issue, and it affects people on a very wide scale, because AI is not some all-powerful computer deciding things based on its own merit. It's based entirely on the biases of whatever information it receives. Now, in some cases, this is funny, in some cases, it's not. A funny example, which may not be funny for all, does anyone remember Microsoft's AI-based Twitter bot? I think it lasted for about 24 hours. So it went on Twitter, and it was going to learn from responses it got on Twitter and things it read on Twitter, and then it would essentially start posting. Within hours, it was posting anti-Semitic content, racist content. It became the most foul-mouthed bot, and Microsoft had to take it down because it was getting garbage in and garbage was going out. And everyone thought, well, that's very funny, actually. How foolish of Microsoft to think that Twitter was a safe place. It wasn't sort of the bottom half of the internet at times. Well, there we go. But it's happening on another scale, where in the US, and this article is from a few years ago, and it's still going on, AI is used in terms of sentencing for people who may or may not be entitled to bail. Should they get bail? And if they don't get bail, or if they're being sentenced for a crime, how long should their sentence be? And all of the AI is running off data, historical court data of when people have absconded from bail or how likely they are to recommit an offence. And the problem is that data is skewed. It's skewed against a particular ethnic group. So the AI decides, well, you're black, you've committed the same crime as someone who was white. Because you're black and the data suggests that you're more likely to reoffend, therefore you will get a longer sentence, or you will more likely to abscond, so we will not give you bail. It's essentially messing with people's lives in a way that they've got no right to object in terms of what they think. They're just like, well, the judges decided this, but the judges use an AI tool without probably realizing what the issues are. And I think more awareness is needed. I still go back to the assumption that actually the bottom line of a company is what they're after. And if the AI gets the result they want, they may not be that interested in ethics. And that's not always true. I've made the points that AI is accelerating quickly. We interface with AI without necessarily realizing what we're interfacing with, but there is a move for responsible AI. Not everyone is involved. I'm working with actually the biggest proponent of responsible AI, and this may surprise you, but in terms of my area, it's banks who want to make sure they're making the right automated decisions in terms of their customers, maybe because they're worried about what happened with some of the social media companies, but they're the ones really focusing on it. We don't see it so much, maybe they're just not using lawyers, in terms of advertising. We do see it in things like construction or development of new technology. A lot of the new technologies, things they're trying to then sell to people like banks. We don't see that much of it in social media companies. And I would suggest, and this may be a controversial view, maybe it's a personal view on Facebook, which I do still use, that Facebook only are now focusing on changing how they use algorithms to feed people content, not because they were outraged of the outcome of what happened in terms of Brexit or the US election or anything else, but perhaps only because they got caught. And actually, that's what's triggering it on rather than anything else. As we stand, we're in a position where there are no real broad rules regulating AI. There's no laws. People will have their own industry laws, people set their own rules, but the EU one is a big difference. So the draft EU regulation, which is only in draft, so we can't actually guarantee that the thing will come in and it will be subject to amendment, has all sort of rules relating to AI and what you can and can't do. It sets up, if it goes through, essentially an European AI board. So this is a board who will decide whether AI should be allowed in certain areas, will take decisions in the risk categories, for example. It also would impose fines. At the moment, the suggested fines are the same as those in terms of the GDPR, which is 20 million euros or 4% of your global turnover, whichever is higher. It's quite exciting. And it has things such as prohibited systems. And I would like to read out, which I hate reading from slides, but I'll do it in this case, one element from Article 5, which is 1A, where it says artificial intelligence practice shall be prohibited. And that includes the placing on the market, putting into service or use of an AI system that deploys subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness, which again sounds awfully sinister, in order to materially distort a person's behavior in a manner that causes or is likely to cause that person or another person physical or psychological harm. Now, you could argue you're having a late evening and you've had something to drink, and you decide to go on the internet, and then you start buying rubbish on eBay because the algorithms pushed you that, or AI, that may somehow cause you psychological harm when whatever terrible thing you've ordered shows up. It's possible. But surely you would think that the use of using subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness in order to manipulate them, which is what this prohibits, is a bad thing. It should be prevented. So I work with people who are AI specialists, AI developers. They are very annoyed with this suggestion because that's exactly what we want our AI to do. That's how it will be the most effective. We can sell it for the most money, essentially by ways to manipulate people without them knowing. That will be incredibly useful in terms of advertising, in terms of companies trying to get people to buy into their products. And you think, well, will this regulation come through? And maybe it is needed. So, again, I've run out of time incredibly quickly. As a lawyer, I think we need a massive change in terms of how AI is treated. But I know from dealing with data law for most of my career that the law catches up with what's going on in the world, if at all, very, very slowly. I also know that the world is becoming very fractured in terms of how it looks at things, and you will see different regulations relating to AI in one part of the world compared to another. The EU, I know lots of people say that lawyers like the EU because they bring out laws like the GDPR, which make lawyers lots of money because they're so big and complicated and everyone's scared of them. I do think the EU is leading the way on this, but I don't know if other organizations will follow suit. There will be lobbying their governments saying, we don't actually want any hard regulation of AI. We'll all decide on the ethics ourselves. But as I said at the beginning, the ethics, it's not something you necessarily want to always put in the power of big business or a big corporation. So that's it from me. I'll hand over for questions. What I will show you, has anyone seen this film? This is hopefully the only AI reference that no one's got. So this is a film called Colossus, the Bourdain Project. And I think it might be from the 60s. And it's about an organization, or two organizations, both developing supercomputers to monitor their defense systems pre-Skynet and their internal affairs using, admittedly, it's artificial intelligence, but it's using punch cards and rolls of tape, but there we go. Now, the two systems start talking to themselves and decide the best way to make sure that the world remains safe is not necessarily handling the weapons, but to put all of humanity under their control into fake prisons. So it's, again, don't assume that AI will necessarily go the way you think it will, and that even if you're thinking of in the most ethical terms, whatever you feed it may not be interpreted the way that you expect. And that's it for me. Has anyone got any questions?